So before we formally begin, just a reminder for our online participants that we do have French and Spanish interpretation available. So in your Zoom, you have there the interpretation options. So this will be in English, Spanish, and French. And for those here in the meeting room, we do have interaction for English to Spanish interpretation. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening to those on Zoom. Welcome to the launch of CPDE's VNR Voluntary National Reviews Study for 2022. I am Jodel Dakara. I'm the Network Manager of CPDE and will be facilitating you for our activity this afternoon. Um, we're supposed to be having our welcome remarks from one of our co-chairs, but at this moment, she's at the United Nations. So I'll be providing you a quick background on what will happen this afternoon. So as I've mentioned earlier, we are launching the sixth edition of CPDE's VNR study. So this is an annual undertaking that CPDE does every June and July to look into the different effectiveness principles and how they are incorporated in the VNR exercise. We are also looking into how civil society organizations from the different countries, both those reporting and not, are included in the different implementation of the SDG and also in the actual country level review processes. So this afternoon, we are glad that we are joined by colleagues from the United Nations Development Program and also colleagues from different countries from Argentina, the Philippines, and Cameroon who will be sharing with us their experiences no, in engaging, their experiences and also the challenges that they face in engaging the VNR exercise in their own countries. And then we will also, as mentioned earlier, be launching the CPDE's VNR study with a presentation on the key trends for 2022, which will be given by Joe later on. Okay, so shall we proceed? Okay, so I am now turning the floor to just Josefina Villegas, our Policy and Membership Coordinator, to walk us through the CPD VNR studies and the key trends from the said research. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Jodel. And thank you, colleagues and everyone that has been able to spare time for attending the launch of this event, the launch of our VNR study. So the outcomes from the study we conducted this year are quite interesting. I think that there are some trends that are probably going to allow for some future reflections, and ideally will be also taken up by the panelists to react and comment upon. I would like to mention that this is the sixth edition of this study conducted by CPDE. It started as a way of assessing our members' perspectives on how the VNR processes were being conducted at country level. And we do this by providing a survey that circulated through our memberships and other networks, framing VNR participation from the effectiveness development lens, effectiveness development principles lens. So before moving forward, sorry, I'll just give a brief context. For this year, given the fact that there were already several countries presenting their VNRs for the third time, even some countries presenting the VNRs for the fourth time, and because we've been conducting this study already in 6 different editions, we were able to add some more questions, which have allowed for a deeper understanding of certain trends, especially in terms of inclusive participation during the process. So now, yes, next slide, please. This is basically the extent to which our survey has been conducted to. We have had representation from 47 CSOs from 26 countries, out of which 18 of those countries are countries reporting this year. So we think, yeah, that makes it quite relevant for the outcomes of this year's VNRs. Next slide. As mentioned before, it's been 47 civil society organizations that have been part in the study. And something that we ask the organizations when completing the survey is if they have participated or engaged in other previous editions. And we do have a quite interesting percentage of reiterated participants, which also signals a trend of interest and participation in the study. Next slide. This is here is what I was mentioning. 35 out of the respondents countries will be presenting the VNR, and the rest have presented in the previous years. Oh no, sorry, this is a different point. Trying to access my notes, but having some issues with that. Apologies. Okay, so that's the list of all the countries that we've covered, the amount of organizations responding from each country, and which of those countries actually have been reporting this year. Just to mention that in many of the cases, even as we will present today during the panel, these organizations are actually national platforms. So they are not one organization, but they represent a group of organizations that have actually conducted a joint effort to assess the VNR process in their countries. So just to clarify on the point I was making before, about 2/3 of this year's respondents are organizations who are committed to the process and have been engaged in the survey in previous editions. Lastly, just a comment on methodology. Of course, this study is limited to the contributions of the respondent CSOs. Mostly, most of them are CPDE focals in their respective countries, but we do not understand that they represent an exhaustive landscape of civil society organizations in their country. This is our contribution from, of course, a limited perspective, a limited set of organizations participating. So moving ahead, well, just a little bit of context. We are definitely already halfway through the implementation of Agenda 2030, and we have acknowledged as civil society organizations that there has not been much progress. Of course, this has been derailed by the pandemic, and it has also provided governments an excuse, a facility to ramp up militarism and to further limit the rights of the people, as reported by our member organizations on the ground. Next slide. We believe that the HLPF theme to build back better for this year's HLPF is ignoring the need for a more ambitious effort. And it's actually signaling a trend to strengthen the ways of the old. There is a lack of recognition to the fact that political ambition needs to be raised, that this is not a matter of being good on the wording. If the actual process are not being inclusive enough, are not taking into consideration what is actually happening on the ground. But without further ado, moving forward. So part of this lack of system change that we notice when member organizations report back to us through the study is that 87% of the total 47 respondents have reported that their countries have integrated the SDGs into their national frameworks. So it's a high level of countries that have actually incorporated the SDGs to their national frameworks. Yet only 7 out of those CSOs say that the recommendations have actually been included in their country's VNR. And out of the total, only 6 were able to access their country national frameworks. So despite that there are mechanisms in place for SDG integration into national development priorities, the role of civil society organizations is still limited. And it talks about a persistent lack of acknowledgement of civil society as an independent development actor in their own right. This trend is actually, unfortunately, consistent with the trends identified in previous CPDE VNR studies from 2020 and 2021, where it is revealed that although there is a high level of awareness on SDG implementation and VNR processes, meaningful civil society participation is yet to be effectively integrated and implemented. Next slide. So what we call for is extraordinary action aligned with the effectiveness development cooperation principles toward possible pandemic recovery. And why do we frame it this way? Why do we believe this is important? Well, we have 4 points on this. So EDC is essential to the Future We Want and Agenda 2030 implementation, as it is the only way to truly realize inclusiveness on SDG 17 on partnerships for the goals. EDC is essential to leaving no one behind and focusing on the marginalized sectors of society. Next slide. EDC as a framework, EDC allows for a framework for enjoining all development actors, especially duty bearers, into honoring their commitments. And lastly, EDC is an approach to development which strengthens multilateralism that actually responds to the issues on the ground. So with this context setting, I'll move ahead with the findings of the studies. The overall finding is that progress on all principles have remained stagnant or have declined. We have here the 4 EDC principles, and we have also assessed through our study how COVID-19 response and concrete action has been incorporated into VNR reporting. So that's also why that's stated there. So we have country ownership, inclusive partnerships, transparency and accountability, and a focus on results. Moving ahead with the first principle on country ownership. As mentioned before, ownership at the national level remains the same. The localization of the SDGs is still unrealized. And the reason, I think that with the big PowerPoint, the graph is a little bit lost, but what that graph says is that 87% of the countries reported through the study have SDG strategies, out of which only 51% have voluntary local reports, meaning that at local level there is less reporting. And out of the total amount of CSOs engaged, 45, almost 46% of the CSOs were unsatisfied with their country's SDGs implementation. In terms of the questions, if any CSO has actually been satisfied with how the country SDG implementation is being conducted, the response is 0%. Next slide. So the main reason behind this is because there is a continued lack of mechanisms for participation of stakeholders, particularly CSOs, in countries' SDG implementation. And of course, corruption, lack of good governance, and the infringement of human rights keep CSOs from engaging in national SDGs processes. Moving ahead, on inclusive partnerships, only about 6 out of 10 CSOs report that there are existing mechanisms for CSO engagement in their country SDG planning, implementation, and review process. Yet, where existent, the quality of consultation and engagement spaces vary significantly depending on each country. Some of the barriers to participation are the lack of resources and funding, the nature and the structure of how consultations are conducted, slow and bureaucratic procedures, and lack of information regarding SDG implementation. Sorry, I shifted to the next slide and didn't say anything. So those are some of the barriers, the most mentioned barriers out of the outcomes. Next slide, please. What we noted this year by adding some questions to the study is that CSOs included in government SDGs consultation processes were mostly included in the planning stage. Less and less CSOs are integrated into the succeeding steps. Only 7 out of 47 CSOs said that their inputs were actually integrated into the final document. So on the one hand, we have that most organizations are involved in the planning, and then there is a downward trend in terms of implementation and engagement in evaluation and verification, but also that when organizations are involved in the planning or in any of these instances, the recommendations and the input provided are not really integrated into final outcome documents. Next slide. Only 4 countries did CSOs, only in 4 countries did CSOs report overall satisfaction with the mechanisms for CSO participations. Most are dissatisfied. And the level of dissatisfaction among CSO is a trend that has also been acknowledged by the TC Data 3060 by the World Bank that shows how much of the global south still ranks low in terms of civil society participation in governance. In our actual VNR study, there's a map reflecting this particular outcome. So we see how governance and lack of civil society participation, weak governance and lack of civil society participation go hand in hand. Next slide. On the third principle on transparency and accountability, very briefly, 60% of report having existing national frameworks and reporting processes, but only a fraction can access this, 6 out of 47 CSOs. While most of the CSOs, despite the fact that access to information is very limited, most CSOs have limited, most CSOs, 45% of them have used the available data in their planning and assessment of their own SDG work. So we see a lack of access to information, yet CSOs use this information, whatever is available, to plan their own interventions, to plan their own work on the ground. Next slide. On the last principle, focus on results, we had some positive outcomes. There seems to be a greater awareness of SDGs at the local level and increased efforts to promote gender equality in national development programs where in some select countries. Some of our members reported that there is reporting on budgeting for gender equality and gender related programs. Yet a major gap is the degree to which CSOs are consulted and engaged in national SDG implementation in their countries. Some other gaps, I will read this because I don't think it's that clear from the big presentation. Other relevant stakeholders are not sufficiently engaged. CSOs are not sufficiently consulted. There is low awareness regarding SDGs among implementers at the local level, or there is low awareness regarding SDGs among implementers at the national level. Just to wrap up, because I think I'm running out of time. In terms of reporting for the COVID-19 crisis, most CSOs have not been treated as development actors in their own right in the response to COVID-19. Past findings of CPDE show that only CSOs who are more institutionalized and government friendly are the ones invited or allowed to participate in government decision process, including responses to the pandemic. Next slide. Many countries only partially depict the repercussions of COVID-19 and the government measures to mitigate it, while some completely omit this in their reporting. So I'll move ahead. Okay, so this has been structured differently. We have 5 main recommendations, and that would be my last point. From the outcomes of the study, we want governments to accelerate, we consider governments must accelerate cascading the ownership of the SDGs from the national to the local level as a means of improving country ownership and inclusive partnerships. Institutionalized, broad-based, multi-stakeholder consultations that include civil society, especially those from the marginalized sectors, must be mainstreamed in the 2030 agenda implementation. Next slide. We call for unblocking barriers to transparency of the 2030 agenda by allowing citizen verification and scrutiny of SDG processes. We call for reform in government processes and budget planning to be more evidence-based and result-driven. And we call for all governments to establish national resiliency plans that target the most adversely affected. Next slide. Our conclusion and my final thought is our conclusion is CPDE is committed to work towards ensuring that EDC is better placed to inform SDG implementation. And on the last slide, we will just find some questions, maybe also for the panel discussion, but of course the invitation is for panelists to react and share their own experiences. Thank you. Sorry for taking more time.
It's okay. Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Joe. Before we go to our panelists, so there are three things that actually struck me from Joe's presentation and also from the results of the study. So the first, the narrative on Build Back Better will actually will not bring us anywhere. It basically ignores what is needed, especially by peoples that are affected by the pandemic and also the other crisis and development challenges. Second is from the perspective of effective development cooperation, we need to challenge the ways of old, because if we will stick to the narrative that has brought us to the pandemic, this will not bring us anywhere near the promises of Agenda 2030. And third is we need to reassert the relevance of effectiveness and effective development cooperation in the future that we want. Okay, thanks, Joe, again. So now we go to our panelists. As mentioned earlier, we are joined by our colleagues from 3 different countries and also our colleague from the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. I'll go first to Arthi Singh, Senior Civil Society Advisor from UNDP. Arthi?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for inviting me today. May I know if I should speak now or just introduce myself and the other panelists? Please let me know.
Yeah, you can proceed now.
Okay. Thank you so much. So first, I'd like to just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Arthi Singh. I am from India. I have grown up throughout Southeast Asia, as well as my own country in India. I've been based out of New York for the last 7 years at UNDP. And the particular work that I'm currently doing at UNDP is very relevant to what we're talking about today. There is a role for UNDP at the global level where we participate in such forums like we're having today. So acknowledging the need that there is still a role for headquarters at UNDP to be more dynamic and more interactive, participate in such forums that are not just about one country or one region, but that are really cross-cutting in themes as well as from a country typology perspective. So it's really nice to be here, and I'm really grateful to be included in this discussion. I have to say that CPDE is most certainly a very important partner for us, and I'm very happy to see the survey results, and we can certainly go through what my thoughts are. But more importantly, it's more about hearing you and listening to what your organizations feel and taking that feedback from you and then bringing it back to my organization and see what we can do, how we can improve. And there's always a scope for improvement, of course, we know. And in fact, looking at your survey results, they all make sense to me. They're not things that are, came out of the blue. We see them all the time, acknowledging they exist, and we just have to acknowledge they exist and move forward and see how we can all contribute, because we are all working towards the SDGs. So we have that common objective. So just very quickly, I think people know all this, but just to give a bit of an organizational perspective. So we know that we are facing a development paradox. We know that even though people on average are living longer, healthier and wealthier lives, it hasn't really increased people's sense of security. And this is actually true for all countries around the world. And all of this is made worse by the COVID pandemic. And this polarization and uncertainty has also been increased by, we have a climate emergency, we have political polarization, multilateralism is challenged. Of course, there's a closing civic space. This is particularly the topic we're discussing today. So, as you said in your opening, I think it was Jajel, I think that said that, all these factors are actually threatening and reversing whatever progress we have made towards the SDGs. So this is a very, very important discussion in all aspects. Just again, very quickly, we have launched our new strategic plan at UNDP, and I just want to highlight that there are 3 directions for change that we have worked very closely with our countries to focus on, and that's structural transformation, leaving no one behind, and building resilience. Each of these 3 directions requires deep and meaningful engagement with civil society. So not just how many civil society organizations, but how meaningful is that engagement? And I understand that most of your survey is around that, deep and meaningful. So while I discussed my role in headquarters, we know that at UNDP, the vast majority of our work, including our work with civil society, is actually happening at the country level, which is, of course, where all of you are from and you're giving this feedback. But the feedback that we have also taken at the headquarters level is even at the global level, we need to increase our engagement. And one concrete way, actually, I'll name 2, that we have particularly taken into account this year is that we have started to consult with civil society partners and networks, just like yours, in terms of the the global products that UNDP puts out. So this year, the Human Development Report, we consulted with civil society partners, and it was, a very helpful consultation for us. We did several rounds of consultations. There were around 6 key organizations who were panelists, but there were 150 participants. We, for example, Action for Sustainable Development, Civicus, Social Watch, Global Partnership for Sustainable Data, Youth Advocate for Climate, the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes. So these are just the few that were the panelists, but we had over 100 participants. We conducted this consultation entirely in Zoom, and all the follow-ups were also done digitally. So, I would say this is with a grain of salt, the only positive aspect of COVID really is all of our comfort with online meetings. And of course, this does help with budget restrictions. We were able to bring to the table a lot more civil society organizations because it was all done via Zoom, and more of our teams could also participate. The other thing that we're really focusing on is including civil society partners in all of our online launches. So we have the Don't Choose Extinction campaign that we're really, really focusing on this year. And we have, in all of our launches, invited civil society organizations. And again, this is less about who can be there in person because these are all virtual. And it's also, coming back to the survey results, it is really important, as I said at the beginning, and I just want to reemphasize it, we have to look, UNDP, we have to continuously look for more ways to engage. We have to diversify the types of civil society partners that we engage with. And this network that is here today is a great network. And, we would love to tap all of you. So as we have future launches, as we have all of that, I would love to discuss with you if you're open, amenable, and how others feel about that. And also, I would be grateful to hear more feedback on the VNR process. And of course, specifically where you think UNDP can help with this, addressing this feedback, which I think is very, very striking. As you said, the results speak for themselves. I want to listen to you and, and commit to wherever we can. So having said all that, I'm sorry if I spoke a bit too long. I look forward, and really all of you are an inspiration for our work, and we couldn't do what we do without all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti. Thank you also for that invitation, no, for more engagement, meaningful engagement coming from civil society organizations. And this afternoon, we will actually hear from, as mentioned earlier, we will hear from civil society organizations who have been part of the VNR exercise and also other engagement with the different development actors. So we go to our colleague from Pampa 2030 in Argentina, Hernan Rogerelio. And after him, Cham Perez from the Council for People's Development and Governance and the Center for Women's Resources in the Philippines. And then Eugene Ngalim from the Cameroon Youth and Students Forum from Cameroon. Hernan, the floor is yours.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. A todas y todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación y algunas consideraciones previas muy breves para no agotar el tiempo y ser respetuoso del mismo también para los otros panelistas. Estoy aquí porque el compañero Humberto Chiquilla no pudo estar, si bien está allí con ustedes. Tenía un problema de salud, estaba muy difónico, la verdad que se le hacía imposible poder conversar, poder atender esta actividad, así que desde ya que se disculpa y mando un gran saludo, y así que estamos aquí representando un poco y tomando el lugar de Humberto. Después, muy brevemente, bueno, mi nombre es Hernán Ruggiero y represento a la Confederación General del Trabajo de la República Argentina, del sector sindical, pero principalmente en esta oportunidad voy a hablar desde la plataforma argentina de monitoreo para la Agenda 2030, que es Pampa 2030, y comentarles un poco muy brevemente de nuestra plataforma, que es una plataforma que nació allí por el 2017, con esfuerzo de las organizaciones sindicales y de un conjunto de organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Pampa 2030 está conformado y fue creciendo desde ese entonces por organizaciones, como decía, de centrales, las 3 centrales sindicales de la República Argentina, la CGT, la CTA de los Trabajadores y la CTA Autónoma, en conjunto con organizaciones de derechos humanos, organizaciones feministas, cooperativas, fundaciones, movimientos sociales, indígenas, sector académico, ¿no? Un conjunto muy diverso de actores y de perspectivas que nos permiten, a nuestro entender, tener un abanico muy amplio de opiniones, de perspectivas, y que nos da, creemos, una fortaleza que es un gran valor agregado a la hora de trabajar y de tratar a la Agenda 2030. Dentro de nuestra plataforma nos guiamos por algunos principios, ¿no?, que son el Estado de Derecho, la democracia, la participación, el diálogo social, la pluralidad, la autonomía y la diversidad, una perspectiva integral y dialógica de la Agenda 2030 y los principios internacionales de eficacia al desarrollo, de la misma manera que los principios de cooperación sur-sur. Dicho esto, digamos cuáles son nuestros principios de actuación y una serie de objetivos que nos trazamos y que tienen una vinculación directa con el tema de la participación en los informes nacionales voluntarios. Nuestros objetivos que nos alientan, digamos, en la tarea cotidiana es la de fortalecer el espacio de articulación entre las organizaciones que mencionaba anteriormente, es también difundir, concientizar y sensibilizar acerca de la Agenda 2030 y promover las alianzas territoriales, ¿no? Con especial énfasis en un enfoque federal. Nuestro país es un país muy, muy extenso y donde a veces se dificulta un poco la llegada de este mensaje y de la agenda a todos los rincones de nuestro territorio, así que es un objetivo muy importante la federalización de esta agenda, y para ello realizamos acciones de sensibilización y capacitación, donde estamos profundizando nuestra labor en diversas provincias y con la intención de capilarizar cada vez más nuestro trabajo y llegar hasta los municipios también. También es parte de nuestra actividad, y dentro de nuestra hoja de ruta está la producción de los informes paralelos, que van muy de la mano con los informes voluntarios, y donde nos proponemos monitorear la Agenda 2030 y fundamentalmente año a año vamos haciendo hincapié en cuáles son los objetivos que nuestro gobierno prioriza, y a partir de allí, pero no solo eso, pero sí teniéndolo como un faro para cada año, hacemos una mirada un poco más exhaustiva de estos objetivos, ¿no? Argentina presentó, lo decían recién en este informe, por tercera vez, un informe nacional voluntario, donde como plataforma tuvimos la posibilidad de participar en la presentación que hizo el gobierno en la Casa Rosada, que es la casa de gobierno de nuestro país, hace muy poco, y tuvimos la posibilidad de estar allí presentes como Pampa 2030, presentando nuestra visión también de los objetivos que el Estado, que el gobierno había priorizado, ¿no? Entonces, eso también nos parece que da cuenta un poco del grado de participación, incidencia nuestra nuestra como espacio de articulación, ¿no? Como Pampa 2030, en los informes nacionales voluntarios, donde hemos podido participar, donde hemos podido también dialogar e intercambiar algunas ideas. Siempre nos queda algo en el tintero, pero bueno, es parte justamente de nuestra posibilidad de trabajo y nuestra articulación, tanto al interior de Pampa como en la articulación que tenemos con otras organizaciones, ¿no? Entonces, la posibilidad de tener este diálogo con este gobierno para poder dar tratamiento a la agenda nos parece sumamente relevante, y más considerando, como decía este informe, donde hay una gran cantidad de países que no tienen esta posibilidad, ¿no? Entonces, tal vez no naturalizar este diálogo, sí claramente darle la importancia y la significancia que esto tiene, sobre todo en un marco, como vimos recién, donde hay muchos países que este diálogo, esta posibilidad de incidencia y de trabajo conjunto entre los estados, los gobiernos y las organizaciones de la sociedad civil no puede llevarse adelante, ¿no? Entonces, nos parece que desde Argentina resaltar eso, y resaltar nuestra posibilidad de actuación, ¿no? Después no sé si habrá otro espacio de intercambio para poder explayarnos un poquito más acerca de los posicionamientos que tenemos como plataforma respecto de los objetivos que se ha trazado el gobierno como prioritario y que ha presentado aquí, como decíamos, antes de hacerlo frente a la asamblea allí en Nueva York, ¿no? Entonces, por ahí me quedo hasta aquí para hacer una presentación de nuestro espacio, para comentarles un poco cómo está constituido y cómo es la importancia del diálogo, ¿no? El gobierno nacional también hace muy poco creó el Consejo Económico y Social, donde es también un espacio multiactoral, con fortaleza tripartita, para delinear políticas públicas estratégicas para nuestro país. Y Por suerte también hemos logrado firmar el programa de trabajo decente por país, donde la OIT tiene un rol también muy importante allí. Así que es otra posibilidad de actuación conjunta donde los actores de la sociedad civil, los actores sindicales, empresariales en particular en este caso, tenemos una gran participación y responsabilidad también a la hora del desarrollo y la implementación de todo lo que allí se consensúa, digamos, para realizar y para incidir en la política pública. Así que yo me quedaría por aquí ahora y si hay después alguna otra ronda, simplemente mencionar algunos, como decía, de nuestros posicionamientos respecto de algunos de los objetivos en particular, sobre todo los que el gobierno argentino ha decidido considerar como prioritario y que ha informado allí. Así que un gusto y nuevamente y un saludito a Humberto y que se mejore, que sé que está por allí. Así que, bueno, quedamos aquí atentos a cualquier consulta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Hernan. We will have open discussion, debate later after we finish all the inputs from our panelists. So we now go to Cham Perez from CPDG and the Center for Women's Resources in the Philippines. Cham?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So, again, my name is Cham of the Center for Women's Resources and the Council for People's Development and Governance, so CPDE. It is a civil society platform that facilitates the participation of marginalized sectors in all aspects of public policy programs and projects, no, to ensure Filipino people's right to development. So I'm going to speak today coming from the perspective of civil society organizations in the Philippines. As you know, the Philippines has presented its VNR for the third time yesterday. Philippines is also co-chair of the group of friends of the VNR. The Philippines was also the chair of APFSD, the regional process last March. So it seems like the Philippines has been doing a lot in the implementation of the SDGs, setting itself as an example to other countries. In the Philippines, in terms of the implementation of the SDGs, the blueprint of the Philippine government is the Philippine Development Plan. It has the National Economic Development Authority that takes the lead in SDG implementation. It has established the SDGs stakeholder chamber that serves as the multi-stakeholder mechanism to help realize the SDGs. And of course, we have the Philippine Statistics Authority where the progress of the SDGs is recorded and uploaded. I'm going to raise a few points here on the implementation of the SDGs in the Philippines, as well as on the participation of CSOs at the VNR and other development processes. So the blueprint of the Philippine government, the PDP, is itself for us problematic as it is anchored on the already bankrupt neoliberal development framework that for decades has led us to greater poverty and hunger. So it is profit-oriented, it puts private capital and profits over the people. So the setbacks and the regression that we are experiencing, not necessarily reported by the Philippine government, is not surprising because, of course, we're still operating in the same system. So yesterday, in the Philippine government's VNR report, it mentioned a lot about new programs and policies, how it made innovations in the economy using digital technologies, how it addressed the pandemic, how it provided, for example, gadgets to address blended learning. But we noticed that there was no mention on agrarian reform, no mention on substantial increases on wages, even if we have laws that that's supposed to protect women and children, these laws are not fully implemented. And instead, there are laws implemented amid the pandemic that laws that restrict the democratic civic spaces, like the anti-terror law. No? So whatever has been said yesterday on development or economic progress, we say that it's only superficial or it is very short-lived. Now, in terms of CSO participation, while we are welcoming the government's initiative to create this stakeholders chamber, we still see how these government consultations are undervalued and the CSOs are taken for granted. The process, although is open to civil society, is not very inclusive. There is a tendency we see to accommodate organizations that have direct services or those whom they deem can fund the SDGs implementation. So if your organization is more on advocacy or policy advocacy, usually you are not accommodated or sidelined in the processes. What we are also seeing, because they are looking into organizations who can fund SDGs implementation, so we see a couple of corporations in this stakeholder chamber. So there's basically increased reliance in private sector for funding the SDGs implementation rather than mobilization of domestic resources. So actually this year we were not able to participate in the government's preparation of the VNR. But in 2019, we were able to do so, but only after repeated calls to the NEDA to be accommodated in the process. No? I'd also like to mention that the VNR report was released very late. It was only released, I think, last week, and we only got hold of it. We only got hold of it because some friends in the civil society who's part of that stakeholder chamber gave us a copy. No? So it's very difficult to engage at the national level. So we would go to the regional processes, to the global processes where we can bring our voices. Of course, we see that the government is missing a lot when it is not engaging with civil society. In CPDG, as early as last year, we have been preparing for the VNR and the HLPF. We gathered organizations of workers, farmers, women's organizations in a series of discussions on the SDGs to assess the Philippine government's implementation and to present our alternative policy proposals. But then again, we were not able to access the VNR process at the national level this year. No. Another point, and this will be my last point, no, that we would like to raise is the shrinking or closing of civic spaces where civil society and people's organizations, including women's organizations, who are actually pushing for genuine transformative development in our own capacities, even before the SDGs, even before the MDGs. Many of us are sidelined. Many of us are not only sidelined in development processes, but are actually directly attacked, harassed, intimidated, or even killed. And this is actually very, very incoherent and a regression on SDG 16 and SDG 17. So I'm going to stop there and maybe later I can add more. Thank you.
Thank you, Cham. Our next panelist is Eugene Ngalim from Cameroon.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And I wish to recognize that there's someone in the hall who seems to be strange. Yeah, who seems to be strange. And of course, it's my colleague partner from Cameroon that we work on the processes of VNR and SDGs in general. So I'm happy he's here And I'm sure that at the end of my presentation or during deliberations, he could be able to add value to what I'm going to present. I have 7 slides, 7 short slides to present. Can we move to the next slide? And that's a plan, a short introduction, the VNR process in Cameroon, the positive trends, the negative trends, and recommendations. Can we move to the next? Now, CAMUSFOB, like you know, is a youth-led CSO that exists since 1999 with legalization from the government of Cameroon in 2001. So we celebrated our 20th anniversary of official legalization last year in October 2001. We are also a pioneer founder and member of the CPDE youth constituency since 2013. And I used to be in charge of the Africa regional constituency. We are an active member of active CSO of the promotion of the SDGs and the MDGs. And just to note that I used to be the UNDP youth spokesperson for the MDGs in Cameroon from 2004 to 2015. We are a member of many other platforms, including the CSO Forum on the SDGs in Cameroon. And we have participated in almost all the VNRs since 2016. And we are a key contributing CSO to government process in Cameroon. Can we move to the next? Now, the next is the process in Cameroon. I'm pleased to note that the process in Cameroon has been ongoing since the adoption of the SDGs. It's not just the VNR, but it has been an ongoing process. Though recently compounded with the COVID-19 and the current security situation in Cameroon. Cameroon has been plagued or faced with a number of crises in some of the regions. Cameroon is presently presenting for the second time. Cameroon presented their VNR for the first time in 2019. The process in Cameroon has been inclusive, including the civil society, but not as we would have wished, we of the civil society. The process has also been linked to the action dialogue on the high-level forum 3. And just to note that government already organized the action dialogue in Cameroon, and which also brought together the civil society as part of the action dialogue. The process has been inclusive, including the civil society, but like I said, not as we wish. Cameroon's report took into consideration the impact of COVID-19 in the implementation of the SDGs, because this actually impacted the implementation of the SDGs. And the civil society report recognized and appended by the government in government report. So if you see the government report, you will see the recognition of the civil society report, on which I have a copy here. Again, civil society under the leadership of site savers, and like I said, Dr. Oye, we seated there is the country director of site savers in Cameroon. They work with people living with disabilities. In our report, we considered SDG 16, which government did not consider. Cognizance of the fact that Cameroon is plagued with a lot of crises, violence, and so on. So we consider this in our civil society report. Again, I wish to go back to say, though we are incorporated into the government process, but it's just at the level of process. When it comes to funding, we don't get that and all of that. For example, coming here, him and myself, we paid for our tickets. So, but we are in the government delegation, but we paid for our tickets, CAMUSFOB, as a member of CPDE, conducted a baseline on the impact of COVID-19 with the support of the CPDE in 2020, particularly on youth activism, employment, and growth upon appraising the Busan principles in 2020. As well, we also conducted a baseline on assessing youth-driven social accountability indicators within the 2013 agenda in 2019. And I still have some of those reports here. So these are basically mainstreaming the youth in the SDG process. Can we move on? Now, what are the positive trends from our process? Inclusion of CSOs in government process and consideration of their complementary report is commended. I think that is something positive, the fact that we are included in their process. New forms of collaboration established with specific platforms between different stakeholders, CSOs and public institutions, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of State Control. And then positive effects of decentralization. Cameroon is in the process of decentralization, and with the involvement of local councils, Can we move to the next slide? So what are the negative trends of the process? The COVID-19 and conflicts plaguing Cameroon has a great impact on achieving the SDGs. Few CSOs are part of the process led by the government. Just a few of us are part of that process. Limited resources for fast-tracking the implementation of the SDGs. Limited awareness at the grassroots and outdated data in certain domains. So it makes it difficult to get the real situation on the ground. And the last slide. Now the last slide, recommendations. We have quite a number of those recommendations. If we take our report, every SDG that we work on has recommendations. So what I have here is just a resume, a summary of some of the recommendations. And there is need for an establishment of a permanent multi-stakeholder and inclusive mechanism for monitoring and evaluating the SDGs in Cameroon. This should be a committee which is regulated. After the VNR, you realize that maybe it ends at that level. The next time we're talking about VNR, another committee is signed, is signed with, stakeholders as part of that. And when it ends, we want something that is permanent, that we should be able to monitor and evaluate the progress. A clear budget line should be allocated to streamline SDGs in policies and programs, as well as funding of CSOs programs working on the SDGs. There is need for greater engagement of decentralized institutions and the grassroots through the localization of the SDGs. Like I said, we're in the process of decentralization, and there is need to engage councils and the regions in all of these. There is need for continuous and updated collection of disaggregated data. We need data that you could easily analyze and get and see the progress being
Eugene,
made.
sorry, because there's a problem with interpretation. I'm
Okay.
sorry. They cannot hear the Spanish translation. So I want to ask if it's working now.
Okay, good.
I'm asking, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It should be fine now. Yes, okay, you can
Okay,
proceed. Sorry.
thank you. So there is need to establish mechanisms and institutions for the management of conflicts and regulating the illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons. We need such mechanisms and institutions that are permanent. For example, we need a national commission on small arms and light weapons. This is recommended by the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons and many other instruments that Cameroon has ratified, like the Arms Trade Treaty. There is need to improve on inclusive universal health care and services with accessibility to people living with disabilities. This is very key. There is need to improve on the enabling environment for both civil society and the private sector to be able to thrive. We need that. There is need to adopt a robust plan, very flexible one, on tackling climate change, biodiversity, and food security. We know what is ongoing now, especially with the war in the Ukraine, the COVID, and the climate change scenarios. And finally, there is need to for the establishment of a communication plan for awareness raising within Cameroon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and thank you to our other panelists for providing us a snapshot of their own research and also their experiences in engaging the VNR process. We have 10 minutes for open discussion. We're supposed to end at 3:15, but we are proposing to extend a little bit until 3:30 so that we could have more question and answer and discussions. Okay? Is that okay with everyone? Okay. And those online, okay? Yes. So I am now opening the floor for questions to address to our panelists. When you ask your questions, please state your name, your organization, and who do you direct your question to. And okay, who wants to go first? Shanta, Joseph, and one more for this round. And online. Okay. Alaru. Okay. So Shanta, Joseph, and Alaru for this set. Thank you. Shanta, please.
Thank you for the excellent presentation by all of you. I think it's very, very educational. The question I have is, do you have, your government has set up a mechanism for inclusive participation during the process of VNR from the local level to the national level? So that's my question. Like we have a system, MGOS at the global level and APRCM at the regional level. Is there such a mandatory system, mandatory mechanism at the national and down to the local level to ensure inclusivity, transparency, and all these things, the key feature of the VNR? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shanta. Joseph, please.
Thank you very much. I have a comment and then a question. My comment is actually to add to what Eugene has presented. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to discover this group. I've seen the report, is very insightful. Thank you very much. Just to add that, maybe that also touched on the question of my predecessor, that in Cameroon, we had some VLRs, voluntary local reviews that were carried out as part of the VNR this year. So just an addition, and everything else is fine. This is the second time that a civil society platform that I'm sharing with very, very active participation of Eugene of CAMUSOP is doing a spotlight or complementary report this year. And again, it has been appended to the government report. Now, my question is to the colleague of, is it Philippines? Yes. Okay. In Cameroon, we have this experience where we actually left from very far, probably we're at the point where you are, the kind of relationship that we have with the government, to the point where now we are seen as trusted. That is, we have built that trust relationship between the government and ourselves. Eugene says something very important, because the tendency will be that they will say, okay, there are some civil society organizations or platforms that are pro-government or that are government friendly. That's why they are associated, But the government of Cameroon said they are not going to deal with SDG 16. And it is not in a national report. But we, as a platform for civil society, we said, there's no way you can do a VNR without SDG 16. And we actually dealt with that, and the government accepted our report and appended it to the government report. And if you look at SDG 16, you'll see that it's not all praises to the government. It's actually very critical to the government. So my question to the colleague of Philippine is, because she said there are like two groups of CSOs. The CSOs that actually do service delivery are more, tend to be more associated or recognized by the government. And the CSOs that do a public policy and advocacy are kind of not very much friendly. I mean, the government will associate them. So my question really is, what is it that you think you can do to be able to actually bridge that gap so that all the CSOs actually are involved, participate with the VNR processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. Alaru, the floor is yours for your question. Hello? Alaru, are you there? None. I don't think he's
Anymore?
Yeah. Let's go to Hernan.
Sí, ¿qué tal? Aprovecho porque no sé, ahí estaban con algún problema, un problema no, pero bueno, con la traducción, así que por las dudas, gracias por darme la palabra ahora, por si después se complica para los hispanohablantes. No, lo mencionaba un poco y voy a tratar de ser breve, justamente lo mencionaba poco en mi primera intervención, algunas cuestiones que quería resaltar, ¿no? Como articulación, sobre todo, y como espacio y perspectiva de participación, que es un poco lo que guía este debate. Así que mencionar que también desde ONU y desde el gobierno nacional y en conjunto con organizaciones de la sociedad civil, que estamos en la plataforma desde Pampa 2030 con apoyo de Naciones Unidas y el gobierno, se ha logrado consensuar y firmar el Foro de Participación Social para la implementación de la Agenda 2030, ¿no? Que es un espacio que empieza a desarrollarse, que se ha firmado el año pasado y que esperemos que pueda ir cobrando cada vez mayor dinamismo y fortaleza para, como decía en mi primera presentación, poder llegar a una verdadera federalización de esta Agenda 2030, ¿no? Y con la fortaleza que implica un foro donde esté la sociedad civil, donde esté el gobierno y donde estén las Naciones Unidas, ¿no? Creemos que le da una potencialidad muy, muy interesante. Lo mismo que la creación de la Agencia Interinstitucional para las provincias. Quería mencionar un poco, como decía antes, cuáles son los objetivos que el gobierno nacional ha decidido evaluar para este año, revisar, que son el ODS 4, sobre educación, el 5 de género, ¿no? El 14 que tiene que ver con océanos, el 15 con ecosistemas terrestres, el 17 con alianzas, ¿no? Nosotros como plataforma pusimos mucho énfasis en justamente en la necesidad de seguir trabajando y cada vez con mayor posibilidad de articulaciones y alianzas concretas en todo el territorio, en el objetivo 17, así que hemos focalizado mucho en ese punto. Y también en nuestro diálogo con el gobierno, en el momento de la presentación de este informe nacional voluntario, nos hemos manifestado respecto de la necesidad de una inclusión de metas que hagan mucho más foco y den mucho más protagonismo a la juventud y a los adultos mayores. De la misma manera que para otros ODS hemos pedido también y denunciado la explotación de mares por flotas extranjeras, digamos, en las costas. Esto tiene que ver con el ODS 14 y en ecosistemas terrestres, que es el ODS 15, digamos, la falta de articulación entre los gobiernos provinciales y federales, ¿no? Aquí en nuestro país hubo el año pasado acontecimientos muy desgraciados, lamentablemente con incendios forestales muy, muy importantes que han lamentablemente derivado en muchas pérdidas de hectáreas, muchas pérdidas y problemas para toda la población, sobre todo en las provincias del noroeste argentino. Y por último, mencionar el rol relevante que tiene el Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo, el PNUD, en la conformación originaria de nuestra plataforma, pero también en el apoyo a la federalización de nuestro trabajo y de nuestra agenda. Y aquí me quedo.
Thank you, Hernan.
He concluido. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for that. We will give the floor to other panelists to answer the questions. Cham?
Hello, okay. Thank you for the question. On organizations providing direct services being more accommodated in these spaces, actually, those who are providing direct services are more accommodated, but actually, more space is given to corporations who can fund the implementation of the SDGs. And that's what we want to highlight. But also to note that people's organizations are also providing direct services while also doing advocacy. But the thing is, when your organization is deemed critical of the government, or when you are raising systemic issues, we are usually sidelined, or as okay, so just that last point, no, we have been pushing for sustainable development even without the MDGs or the SDGs, because this is a matter of survival for all of us. If we don't demand systemic change, we will all die. Like, we will literally die, no? So it's a matter of survival for all of us. So I think that's it, no? So yeah.
Thank you so much. In Cameroon, we don't yet have an institutionalized mechanism from the grassroots running right to the top. That's why in my recommendations, we are calling for a structure that should be created, institutionalized structure that should be able to evaluate, should be able to monitor and evaluate. So this is a structure that should be able to touch the various sectors and the entire territory. So, but all the same, the data collected is collected by the National Institute of Statistics alongside other institutions and CSOs. For example, we do baselines, so we do collect data. But it's true that the most recognized data is that from the Institute of Statistics, and that's the data that is used most often in the reports produced by the government and even other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Can we'll now go on, to the second set of questions. I'm seeing Georgina and then Joe. Georgina, please.
Gracias, Jodel. Georgina Muñoz, de Nicaragua, de RENIC, Red Latinas y AOD, CPDE. Muy interesante la socialización de estos resultados para nosotros, porque evidencian realmente que hay una situación frágil en la participación ciudadana en lo que es la construcción de la Agenda 2030, y por otro lado evidencia también que hay una falta de apropiación, creo que por dos rumbos. Por un lado, tenemos una sociedad civil que monitorea, hace monitoreo ciudadano, de alguna manera consigue los planes nacionales de desarrollo y los compara frente a lo que siente, vive y experimenta la ciudadanía. Y tenemos otra sociedad civil que está dentro de un proceso también de monitoreo más gubernamental. Ambas aportan, creo, pero hay que encontrar un balance. No podemos continuar así. Creo que Naciones Unidas tiene que buscar mecanismos, contribuir, sensibilizar a los gobiernos para que hayan mecanismos plurales de participación y pedir que estén sindicatos, que estén campesinos, indígenas, los multiactores, que al final es donde está, donde necesitamos que llegue la Agenda 2030. Y algo último es sobre dónde está la financiación de los recursos para la agenda. A nosotros nos preocupa muchísimo, ya lo decía Camerún, que haya financiamiento para los diferentes programas. Creo que hay que trabajar más en ese sentido, en esa gestión de recursos, ante multilaterales, ante los mismos gobiernos, revisar políticas fiscales que generen ingreso a nivel nacional. Entonces hay un reto y un trabajo conjunto que debemos de emprender. Gracias.
I'll take on the microphone. So maybe also in the spirit of, because there's not much time left, but I had some questions which were flashed before, and actually many of these have already been answered. So the three questions I had posted were, what needs to be done by duty bearers and government? How can development agencies facilitate these processes, particularly on aspects of data availability and significant CSO engagement? And on that one, specifically, I will be asking our colleague from UNDP to provide some further feedback. Interested in hearing further responses on that specific question. And on what can be done by civil society moving forward, I think that a lot has been mentioned. So continuous advocacy, sorry, I'm speaking in Spanish in my head, continuous advocacy for civic space, for human rights, perspectives in development, for inclusive partnerships, for nationalized, structuralized engagement processes, continuous efforts in data collection from CSO perspectives, because we see it's not only valuable in terms of enriching the VNRs, but also in shedding light to those issues where the governments for specific political agendas might not want to add more information. And I think those were the main contributions, but of course, I'm also opening up the floor to other colleagues here who want to add on the last question.
Thanks, Joe. I'm inviting Arthi to respond to some of the questions posed by Joe. Arthi, please.
Apologies for the slight delay. Thank you for that question. It's a very good question. And of course, you know, hearing all of you, generally speaking, what I'm really understanding here is where everyone agrees is that the participation of civil society really needs to be emphasized and needs to be diversified. So it meaningful is a second stage. Right now, what I'm hearing is that there is very little engagement. So, you know, the meaningful comes later. Right now, what you're all saying is that the engagement overall is quite limited. So it's very striking. I mean, of course, I'm not very surprised, but it's very striking, and it really should not be this way. On the second question, that was very specific to what can the UN system do to increase access to data and more of a participatory process. And on the data, I'd like to point something out, which, forgive me if you all know this already, and perhaps it doesn't meet your needs, but we have a portal at UNDP which is publicly available, and please let me know if you are or are not aware of this. It is open.undp.org. And I don't know, I would love to hear if people are aware, but this is a platform that we have, we've had for many, many years now. And in this platform, all the data of UNDP projects is available. And you can also dissect by country, by SDGs. So what this portal gives you access to is the project level data. So it's more about how much, what types of projects we have in that country against which SDGs, how much is the budget for each project, what are the expenditures, and you can look at the donors as well of that country. So, it's not, it doesn't, how much you spend doesn't always one-to-one relate to the outcomes and results, but we hope that, when we map these results, we do it by SDG. So the expenses overall statistically are very close to, the achievement, and where you can see which SDGs are prioritized by that country, you can certainly see that. So when my colleague and friend from the Philippines was talking about which SDGs are not emphasized, and she mentioned women's empowerment particularly, and you can see through this platform that she's absolutely right. If you look at all the SDGs that are there, women's empowerment, there's very few projects. So, it certainly is something that I wanted to mention. It's there. And then I think what's also very important is when you talked about participatory process, as far as we are concerned as an organization, it's a priority for us. There are some limitations that we face, but certainly when it comes to our own processes and how we formulate, and wherever there is space, I'll certainly convey this message to the organization that we need to do more. We need to have more diverse set of civil society partners. I think it was a very good comment from Georgina as well, where she said, Indigenous people, and they're not included, and we certainly need to do that. So I take that feedback, and thank you for that feedback, and we will do more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arthi. Anyone else from our panelists who would want to have a closing response to the question? Eugene, Cham, none? I think we're good. We apologize that we don't have much time anymore. We've already gone over by 15 minutes, unfortunately. But it was an interesting discussion, just to emphasize actually that there was, I think there was a running theme, to in this panel, that we need to challenge the narrative. The narrative that we need to go back to the ways of old. Basically, the development frame that has brought us to the pandemic, to the different the multiple crises that we are experiencing, and instead we need to actually forge together, to collaborate with each other. For a people-centered agenda that is anchored
tomar la palabra.
Social justice. Okay.
Muy cortito. Mi nombre es Andrés Larigoitía, integro la Central de Trabajadores Argentinos y integrante de Pampa 2030. Quería hacer dos acotaciones, la excelente presentación que hizo mi compañero, que en realidad fue muy completa, pero quería dejar algunas cosas, 2 o 3 temas muy claros. Nosotros somos autónomos de la iniciativa gubernamental, y eso tiene que quedar claro. Que nosotros intentemos incidir, acompañar y comprometernos con las acciones de gobierno es una cosa, pero no afecta a nuestra autonomía. Y esta experiencia de Pampa 2030 que como muy bien dijo Hernán, no solo es monitoreo, no somos simplemente jueces que miramos qué hace el gobierno, sino nos comprometemos en una acción concreta con el conjunto de actores sociales para incidir en la implementación y la aplicación de la Pampa 2030. Y en esto quiero remarcar que nuestra autonomía en la creación de esta plataforma, nosotros éramos, y los que componemos Pampa 2030, no estábamos de acuerdo con el gobierno. Y ahí una experiencia que nos sirvió a nosotros fue buscar espacios neutrales. Y ahí Naciones Unidas y la OIT jugó un rol fundamental, porque nos permitía dialogar con el gobierno, porque la sociedad civil tiene que dialogar independientemente de lo que piense cada uno de los gobiernos, pero en un espacio neutral. No éramos utilizados como quería el gobierno anterior, como decir, sí, nosotros le consultamos y en realidad era mentira, sino buscar un espacio neutral. Esta autonomía, que a su vez tiene otro valor fundamental. En esta construcción horizontal, donde hay mucha diversidad de organizaciones, de representatividad, lo que hemos logrado en construcción horizontal es que todas las voces se puedan expresar y buscar que se prioricen las demandas, que eso a veces es muy dificultoso para la sociedad civil. Cada uno va con su demandita y lo único que existe. En Pampa 2030, una construcción horizontal, donde todos tienen la voz, buscamos los consensos necesarios para lograr que la sociedad civil consensúe prioridades de lo que demanda y prioridades en cómo accionar. Simplemente eso y agradecer, pero quería remarcar esto, porque si no aparecíamos como una extensión del gobierno. No, nosotros tenemos total autonomía, acordamos con las cosas que hace el gobierno o disentimos con las cosas que hace el gobierno. Y en realidad la intención es fundamentalmente incidir en las políticas públicas, territorializar y que la sociedad civil se comprometa con la aplicación y la ejecución efectiva de la Agenda 2030. Gracias.
Thank you, Andres. I think that is a very relevant point, no, that we are not, that civil society organizations are indeed independent development actors with our right to initiative to do what we need to do for the constituencies that we are serving. So yeah, that's actually a good wrapping up point, no, that Andres gave us. So I'm now passing the floor to my colleague Matt Simmons, Senior Policy Officer and Liaison, to close this event. Matt?
Thanks, Jodel. I don't need to say much to close, just to thank everybody for joining us, to acknowledge all the work that went into producing the study, all the efforts of colleagues to respond to the survey and to collect the feedback and sort of draw a synthesis that is hopefully resonating with people, and that we can work towards let's say improving the engagement of civil society, not only in the VNR process. That's not the idea. The VNR process is only one small aspect of SDG implementation. What we're looking really to try and improve is engagement of civil society in the implementation of the Agenda 2030. So with that, just to flag, the camera is probably not going to reach this, but we have our little study that we produced fresh off the press. We do have it's online as well. We'll paste the link in the Zoom chat. Unfortunately, the page seems to be down at probably the most inappropriate moment for it to be down, but we'll post it in there for you to save later. And thanks again for everybody that joined in person and online. We have quite a few people in the room here that you can't really see, but thanks a lot. And and there we go. Zoom in on the on the study itself, and we'll see some of you over the next days as governments present their VNRs. Thanks again, and have a nice afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt. And Joe has an announcement.
Yes. I cannot thank I cannot give enough thanks for the collaborations, coordinating actions during HLPF days. It's very, very complex, and I'm very grateful for everyone's effort and time and patience for the discussion. Just briefly, tomorrow CPDE is co-hosting another side event taking place in person in the UN headquarters. It starts at 8 a.m., so it's a very early wake-up call for those that can attend in person. We will be revising a little bit also on how to make VNR processes more inclusive from civil society organizations' perspectives, but also from, we have a quite rich panel from government representatives. So I'll just paste the link here for registration. This is for attending online, because we will be facilitating also a hybrid meeting. So thank you, everyone. And that's it. I think that's a wrap up.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, especially those on Zoom. We have physical copies at the back. Please bring home as many as you can. We have a number of copies here. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Thank you to our colleagues at UNDP. Thanks to our colleagues at PAMPAT 2030. Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you to our interpreters.
Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Hasta
Thank
luego,
you very
gracias.
Gracias, Ana. Gracias, Andrés.
Hasta luego,
Perdón.
bye. Bye,
Es
bye.
que abre el micrófono de
Chao.
Zoom y no es eso. And thank you also to Glenn and Danny from our Global Secretariat team that provided vital support for this to happen, and to all of our interpreters. We will be closing the Zoom link now, I think, or do we want the background to be on the photo? Okay.